across the country this month, and Americans usually turn to leaders for comfort, hope, and answers on how to move forward as a nation during tragic events. Oftentimes, leaders try not to use such moments to mix sympathy with politics. But yesterday, President Donald Trump took the opportunity to do just that. Compare, though, to how another former Republican president, Ronald Reagan, addressed the nation following the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger back in 1986.
Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country.
On behalf of the First Lady, myself, and 340 million Americans, our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now and in the days to come.
Perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly.
We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions and ideas.
I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it.
As FAA says, people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them. They can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program.
I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it.
The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner. That guy's a real winner. Do you know how badly everything's run since he's run this Department of Transportation? He's a disaster.
I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery.
We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary.
There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue.
I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
Reverend Sharpton, President Ronald Reagan in 1986, President Donald Trump yesterday. The contrast couldn't be starker.
You really, and I almost don't believe I'm saying this, but you really almost offend Ronald Reagan to put he and Trump in one sentence. I definitely was against Reagan. Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter and brought in a new era of American conservatism. But Reagan always was decent. I remember when Jesse Jackson, one of my mentors, went and got a Navy pilot out of Syria. Reagan welcomed him to the White House. Reverend Jackson had been a big critic of his. Reagan had him speak right there in the Rose Garden. That's how you become president. I don't understand what it's going to take for people to understand. I do not think Donald Trump has the capacity to grow into the job, because for you to open up by saying we don't know what happened, but then in the next sentence say, but the disabled and diversity did it. Then if you don't know what happened, how do you feel that you even have the right to bring that up while people are still in the bottom of the Potomac River? Let's remember now, when he was talking, people were still in the bottom of that river, not even identified to some of the families. He steps over their bodies like they're props to take shots at his political opponents.
Whenever given a chance to unify, he always chooses divisiveness. Excellent work by the Morning Joe team to put together that eye-opening comparison. Coming up next, we have new details about the ICE raids that were expected to take place in Colorado this week. We're going to be joined by Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold on those new developments.
So many are asking how this could have happened. Out front now is Miles O'Brien. And obviously, Miles, you have spent a career covering this industry, covering tragedies in this industry, and you are a pilot yourself. So this investigation is in its early stages. It's honed in, obviously, on the elevation and the altitude of the helicopter, but we don't know what we don't know right now. What are your leading theories from the information we do have?
Something was happening in that cockpit of that Black Hawk helicopter, which may have distracted the crew, perhaps as part of the training mission. Perhaps they were having difficulty with the night vision goggles. Who knows? The cockpit voice recorder, which I'm pretty certain will be recovered and the data will come out of it, should shed a lot of light of what was happening, what distractions might have occurred. It is hard to see moving air traffic at night in a city with all those background lights. But that is still the responsibility of that crew to see and avoid traffic. And obviously that did not happen here.
No, it didn't. And there was just no time. I mean, as we said, the slides weren't deployed. There was no, at that point, you're low enough to the ground, texting. I mean, there was nothing, just a silence, and clearly so sudden. President Trump has had blame for this in several quarters. He had referenced DEI initiatives. He also specifically referenced the FAA hiring people with severe disabilities. Let me just play for you exactly what he said, Miles.
The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine?
Sure.
So, Miles, he then went on to specify that one of the disabilities he was referring to is missing extremities. Now, this is something actually you know about. You can speak to personally. You're a licensed pilot. You lost an arm in an accident. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, number one, Aaron, let's not forget what it must be like to have lost a loved one and hear this whole, literally with your loved one still underwater. Here it turned into this weird political thing. But as personally, as someone who was a pilot, lost my arm, and went through the process of getting recertified to fly, I can attest to you that I went through every hoop and got over every bar an able-bodied individual would in order to be recertified to fly. The FAA simply does not forsake safety in order to include disabilities in the system. I am part of the aviation community because I persevered through that, and it's an affront to me and all other disabled people to allow that statement to come into play. So it's unfortunate in the context of a terrible tragedy relative to the tragedy these families face. I guess it's not as big a deal, but it is a gut punch to those of us who are disabled and aviators.
Yeah, and incredible that you're able to speak to that personally. Well, Miles, I appreciate talking to you, and thank you very much.
Just a little over a week into his second term in office, President Trump was confronted with this national tragedy. It's a moment when our presidents often unite the nation and console those who are suffering. Here's what we heard from our president yesterday.
I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. Then they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistakes. We then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
After he made those remarks in the briefing room, President Trump was asked to clarify his comments, and he was asked if he was planning on visiting the site of the disaster.
Do you have a plan to go visit the site or meet with any of the first responders?
I have a plan to visit, not the site, because you tell me, what's the site? The water?
Or to meet with the first responders down there?
I don't have a plan to do that.
Do you want me to go swimming? He asks. Upon hearing about President Trump's comments yesterday, I want to share with you what our CNN aviation correspondent, Pete Montine, had to say about it. And here's why. Pete is a pilot himself. He is someone who loves flying despite knowing just how dangerous it can be. Both of his parents were pilots, and he actually lost his mother in a plane crash. Here's what he said on our air yesterday.
It is just so soon, way too soon, to make any sort of indictment or insinuation that air traffic control was to blame here, that hiring policies were to blame here, that the pilots of the Black Hawk were to blame here. This is something that investigators will have to go through, not only on the scene, and they are there now doing the Lord's work. This is only the precipice. And so for the families that are going through hell right now, and I know this because I've lost my late mother to a plane crash, this made it even more hellish. What was that? I just cannot, I'm sorry to get angry, but what is the point of making some sort of speculative, wide-ranging, rudderless...
Rempel went on to accuse Trump allies of engaging in speech and thought policing, the kind of actions for which they force endowment progressive, listing the latter 19 Republican state attorney general planned calling on Costo and end its DI policies and insisting Rapp and Crenshaw are Texas obliquely threatened Apple CEO Tim Cook on social media for not changing the name of Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America in Apple Maps. But as president, Trump does not need law or court discussions to chill disfavored discourse. Media and tech companies are already preemptive buckling